Hello, this is It's Mental Podcast. Today, I know I say that every time, but today we truly have a special guest. Is Ben. He is not a comedian nor artist, but it's someone I met very specially from work. Hey Ben, where are you?
Hey, Moni. I am in the UK,
Ah,
living in the countryside.
what do you do in the UK?
I am still working as a data analyst, but no longer managing a team as I was when we worked
Uh-huh.
together.
Where are you from?
Originally, I'm also from the UK. I'm from Lancashire, up in the north, but I have lived in the south of England for 17 years or
Uh-huh.
so, for most of my adult life, apart from when I was in Berlin.
Yeah, so what were you doing in Berlin?
So I moved there for work, actually, because my boyfriend was headhunted to work for one of the big German names in
Mm-hmm.
Berlin, and it was a good opportunity for him. We'd actually been traveling at the time, so we already had everything packed up and in storage in the UK, and decided we would have a new adventure, having been sort of traveling around the world, and moved to Berlin. And we both ended up working in the same company in the
Mm-hmm.
end.
How long have you stayed in Berlin in total?
So I was there for 4.5 years in total. Originally, I guess we joked about being Brexit refugees, not particularly wanting to go back to a post-Brexit UK, although things changed, I think, with the pandemic and not being able to see people as easily, and we decided to move back and give country life in the UK a go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. And how did we meet?
Through
Uh-huh.
work, as you worked for me,
Yeah,
through
yeah, yeah,
interviewing.
yeah.
Um, you were, I think were you the first first person recruited? I can't remember which order I recruited the team
Uh,
in now, but you were definitely near the beginning. I remember you impressing lots of interviewers, especially when you started talking about being a comedian as well. Actually, I think that was something that really piqued people's interest.
cool. And now I'm glad that I don't need to pitch data analyst that I'm a comedian. uh,
Now you get to do the thing that makes your heart
yeah,
happy.
yeah. I feel, oh, finally I made it. I made it through Arbeitslosgeld. Uh, isn't life amazing?
Yeah.
So I think our relationship as you were my supervisor. Like I think it's quite interesting because we talk a lot about mental health. Although normally, like in the work environment, it's not some uh, experience people would brought up. But through our work relationship, you told me a lot about your dysfunctional family and your dad his issue and your mom her issue. I find that's quite interesting, and I think it's a very good way to build trust because I saw you not only as the person who managed me, but also as like a person who has emotions and has his own life going on and being vulnerable. So I think that's quite cool. Do you want to talk about little bit about your connection with the mental health topic?
Yeah, I
Mm,
think actually first about even why we
mm,
spoke about this when I was your supervisor, which because like you said, this is a bit unusual, and part of my mental health journey, I would say, is um, there's a part of it that became about trying to help others who were in a similar situation, and um, I did not have this same conversation with everybody at work as I had with you. I think I realized sometimes people that I worked with were struggling with mental health as well, and feel that they could. Um, I wanted them to feel that they could talk about it, and if it was impacting them at work, then that was also okay to talk about it. Because getting to that point myself took a very long time, and I punished myself a lot and I pushed through things in work. I worked through possibly through a nervous breakdown, because, well, why wouldn't you? Because it was just a mental health problem, and it's not like I was properly ill, and all these things that I told myself. Um, so that's a kind of part of why I ended up talking about it to some people at work. But um, my the broad arc of my mental health journey would be, well, actually, in a really short bit, there was a lot of time being very messed up. There was a period of time trying to deal with the fact that I was pretty messed up, mostly the fact that I was very, very angry. I was angry at everything and anything, and I saw counselors. I was also medicated as well. I had antidepressants. So we went through that period of like, well, it's just everybody else's fault, and I'm very angry at everything. And the anger kind of mixed in a lot with my overall mental health. That then was beginning to realize, oh, my problem is I was an alcoholic, and then getting sober, and then starting to readdress my mental health through sobriety, and realizing the reason I was angry was partly because I was an alcoholic, and this was my reaction to a lot of things, and then being able to move on and go through therapy again, but go through therapy as somebody who understood then what my problem was, and not to hide from it. But even then, I'd say there's this period where I was handling it and I was having therapy, but I was still quite secretive about it, maybe, as in my friends knew, but it wasn't something I spoke about widely. And maybe there was a bit of um,
Mm.
not shame, but knowing that it wasn't something you
Mm-hmm.
talked about. And then the final bit is going, actually, there is no shame in any of these problems, both the alcoholism and the mental health, and that other people experience them too. And if I speak about those experiences, then other people can maybe hear about how I went through things. They can realize that they're not alone with it, and
Yeah.
maybe get something from me. So I think, yeah, that's kind of the stages of my mental health
Wow,
journey,
that sounds a very
in
long
large.
journey. How old are you? You look like around my age.
That's such a lie. I am 40. It is, I mean, 20 years really. I mean, yeah, I mean, my drinking was pretty much alcoholic drinking from the start, and it's how I
Mm,
coped with life. You know, in my late teens and early 20s, actually mid 20s and so on. Alcohol was a key part of how I
mhm,
coped with life. Um, my late 20s, getting
mhm,
on for 30, is this kind of like turning point in my drinking where it got like very problematic, to the point where I started to seek help, but not necessarily realizing it was the alcohol to start with. I
mm,
started seeking mental health support, mental health. 30
mhm,
is when I got sober. Um, and then, yeah, maybe like 2 or 3 years, both recovery and sobriety.
mhm.
So
Wow.
it's a long time.
Mhm.
It's a big old
So
journey, I'd say.
you used the word that at one point you realized you are alcoholic. What make you to realize it? And didn't you know it the whole time?
Possibly. As I said, like my drinking was not normal at the start.
Mhm,
And whenever somebody questioned my drinking before I realized I had a problem, if somebody questioned my drinking, I would joke and say, "It's just fine. It's fine. I'm an alcoholic. Like that's
mm,
just how I drink." And then when I
mhm,
realized it was a problem, I said I had a problem with alcohol. I didn't. I distanced myself from the idea of being an alcoholic. And basically, the first AA meeting I went to is when I heard other people speak about things, and I was like, oh, right, yes, I am the same as you. And hearing their stories made me go, okay, that's fine. I'm an alcoholic. That is the word for it. Now that I've listened to other people, so yeah, that acceptance, that realization came with hearing other people telling their story, and me realizing their story was the same as mine. And I was
mhm,
like, oh, okay, right, then there we are. That's the problem. now we can do something
And
about it.
by accepting the word alcoholic, do you think it change your behavior and mindset in some ways?
Um, I think the first thing that it did is, it sets out there's only one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I couldn't do in life, and that was drink alcohol. Everything else is fair game, but once I realized that's something that I cannot do, and I should, I think also like that knowing that like the anger and the drinking was always perceived as anger followed by drinking, when actually, it was drinking followed by anger. And if I knew, well, the start of the problem is the alcohol, and then the emotions are what, the emotions and all the problems are what come after, that meant, um, recognizing that that was the problem was very empowering. Um, it still took a lot of time to deal with it, but it was definitely,
Mm-hmm.
I think, without kind of accepting, right, that is my problem,
Mm-hmm.
I
And
would never have been able to do
dealing
something
with
about it.
your alcoholism issues, like you said, it took you 2, 3 years. What was the process you followed?
So I got sober through Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, I would absolutely recommend this as a way to get sober to anybody who's got drinking problems. I think um, a lot of people have issues with the fact that the origins are in a quite a Christian kind of thing, but it was always perceived as a like it's a God of your understanding, and so part of that process was, first of all, okay, I'm an alcoholic. Second of all, I have no power over my drinking. Like this is something that I can't control myself, and realizing if it's something I can't control myself, then I have to have something else to help me. Um, and in the early days, I went to AA meetings. I spoke to people. I made tea at meetings. I put chairs out. I did service, is what we call it. So one thing is like going. Second thing is doing service, and the third thing is trying to help other people. And these were the foundations of getting sober. And when I heard somebody say, you know what, I don't believe in a Christian God, I don't believe in a Abrahamic God of any kind. Just God is
Mm-hmm.
what is the word for the stuff that I can't explain. So I turn up, I help others, I do service, and I stay sober. And I don't need to know how that happens or how it works,
Mm-hmm.
but it works, and I can just call that like this miracle, God. And I was like, okay, that's fine. That works for me. I like that idea, just as long as I'm making the effort. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is part of the process. You have to realize it is work. It is hard work. A lot of people said, sobriety is not for the people who want it. It's not for the people who need it. It's for the people who work for it. Um, and the next stage then is you have to really do some hard analysis. Like you have to look at, first of all, um, you start with everybody who's annoyed you, upset you, pissed you off, whatever in life. You do big, long. It's called an inventory. You have to do all of this about the other people,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to look at the part you played in all of this. Um, and that's really hard. A lot of people don't want to, or just can't face looking at like what was their part in all this damage in their life, all this chaos, all these problems. But you go through that process, and you have to tell somebody else about it. That's part of the process. And at the end, my then sponsor was like, "You're a pretty garden variety, boring alcoholic. There is nothing special about you. There's nothing special about your story. I've heard this story hundreds of times. Um, these things that you hold on to lots of shame about. That what you can do now is not repeat that again. That is where you have some agency now to not pick up a drink again, not allow those behaviors to repeat themselves, and try to forgive yourself
Mm-hmm.
um, as part of the process. That's really hard, I think. Forgiving others was overall quite easy. There was one person who really, really was, uh, yeah, I was really annoyed with and really upset with, and that one took a long time
Mhm.
to go through that process of apologizing to others and forgiving others. But that means, once you've let go of this, you've let go of it. Like, I'm not just going to hold on to this stuff and be angry about it or bitter about it. The final bit of kind of trying to forgive yourself is much harder, I
Mm.
would say. Um, it was very easy to still punish myself over things that I felt I wasn't doing well enough in life. Um, when my peers would say, "You got up, you stayed sober, you helped other people, you managed to go to work, like you did a lot today, actually, if you just managed to, get up and take part in life, um, and look after yourself, and you just have to keep doing this and hopefully, eventually get to the point that you're more accepting of yourself."
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I said it took 2 or 3 years. I don't say I'm recovered. I don't believe that an alcoholic, can do the work and then spontaneously, okay, right, I'm all good now. I could start drinking again. That would be a stupid thing to say. But I think, yeah, that initial work was a few years of, going through that stuff, looking at myself, also going through therapy. So that was another thing I did in parallel. I saw a new therapist. I got to talk about the the many things that had happened in my life around the alcoholism, before the alcoholism, in my childhood, and work through those things as well.
Wow. So, when you had your first AA meeting, did you immediately know that, oh, you are alcoholics and you want to put the work in, or was there some back and forth?
My first AA meeting, yes, I was like completely in, but it was not my first attempt at getting sober. Um, I it took me about 18 months. So basically, after my dad died as a result of his alcoholism, basically he had stomach cancer, and from that diagnosis, like I started drinking very heavily. That was, the joke amongst my friends was like, how do we cope with our parents' alcoholism? Well, we get drunk.
Mm.
That's what we did. And after he died, about a month after he died, I realized I was not able to rein in my drinking. It was excessive. It was every day. I was passing out every night. So I went to the doctor and I said, I'd read about this drug called antabuse, which you can't drink on. So you take a tablet, that's it. Like when the cravings hit, you can try to drink on it, but you'll be very ill.
Mm.
Um, but my initial thing was like, well, if I can just stay sober for a while, then everything will be fine. And my doctor said, well, what do you want your long term relationship with alcohol to be? And I said, well, of course I want to be able to drink. And he said, and if you can't, I was like, oh, we'll deal with that when I get to it. Um, so I dried out for about 6 weeks. I went back to drinking. I pretty quickly got back to square one. I was miserable. I was drinking every day. I was very, very unhappy. But summer was coming, and therefore I was like, well, of course I'm not going to get sober for summer, because who would be sober in summer? That's ridiculous. Um, I lasted, so I drank through to Manchester Gay Pride that summer in August, following which I had a 3 day hangover. It was really awful. Um, at which point I was like, okay, well, now I've not drunk because I had a 3 day hangover, so I'll stay sober. And I lasted about 3 months that time. And actually, when I went back out to get drunk, I had forgotten how miserable I was. Really, really miserable, depressed, um, unhappy with everything. And I started drinking again with like no thought to what the consequences were. And that lasted about another 3 months. And along the way,
Mm.
my then husband's best friend had also got sober, and the hints were there. Like I was asked, do you want to do something about it? And I was like, nope, absolutely
Mm.
not. But basically, the catalyst that got me in was I had gone out. I'd actually gone to get another prescription for that same drug, antabuse, and I had listened to my
Mm.
doctor, and his words, and I went out and got drunk again because I didn't really like what he said. Um, and I scared a close friend. Like I really I was a bit violent with him, thinking I was being playful, but actually I was not so playful, and that was the catalyst that was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And therefore, when I went to my first meeting, I was like, okay, I'm here. I hear what you're saying. Great, I'm in. I don't want to be that person who has scared one of his best friends. That was
Mm,
the thing that I was like, I don't want to repeat this behavior. And it was at that stage a lot less about me than it was about the consequences of my actions. Um, but from that point forwards, I was like, nope, I'm committed. I will largely do what people tell me, and
mm-hmm,
they always said, look, 90 meetings in 90 days. That was the thing. And I was like, okay, right, that's what I'm going to do. Um, and these suggestions that people made was just like, you do these things, you will stay sober. Just keep following these. I mean, they were called suggestions, but they're like, if you want to stay sober, follow the suggestions.
mm-hmm.
And if you ignore everybody, then you might not stay sober. So I committed. I followed the suggestions. I got a sponsor, which is the thing. I was just like, I'm doing this. Let's get on with it. The first one actually didn't work out. I then had a second sponsor, but I tried not to miss a beat. I was like, I don't want to stop. I'm going to keep pushing and pushing, and I want to get through this, because I don't want to drink. I don't want to be that person again.
Wow. So, how does AA meetings work? Do you need to pay? Do you know? Have you attended some ones in Berlin?
I did. I mean, I haven't actually been since the start of the pandemic, for, let's say, reasons. Nothing to do with AA, more to do with me. But I've been to AA. I started in London. That's where I got sober. Um, you do not have to pay. Um, it is self-supporting, and therefore they're reliant on donations. These meetings run on donations. But if you turn up and you are penniless, then nobody's going to ask you for money.
Mm-hmm.
And if you turn up and you've got a job, then people like, think about the cost of your last drink. So it's very it's entirely self-supporting. But if you can't afford to put anything in, you can't afford to put anything in. So you don't pay. You're there. Nobody's forced to go. Well, at least not in the UK. In the US, sometimes it's a mandatory requirement if you get like a drink driving sentence or stuff like that. But that's not what happens in the UK. You go there if you want to. I also I visited a meeting in Berlin before we went traveling. When I went traveling, I went to one meeting in Peru, in Lima. I went to some meetings in New Zealand. One which was really funny because I just had a huge argument with my boyfriend, and I turned up and said, I really need to be here. I've just had a huge argument. I'm really angry. And, out of this room of strangers, somebody just went, and what was your part in it? I was like, oh, screw you. I was so angry. And, at the end of the meeting, I was like, yeah, I've got to go home and apologize, haven't I? Like, I have done wrong here. And this was like kind of one of these, like, small benefits of a room full of strangers. Um, and they will help. They're there. I also went to meetings in Australia as well. I was there. I've done that a few times actually because my mum lives in Australia. Yeah, and then when I moved to Berlin, I mostly went to the queer meetings there, um, because I am gay, and the queer fellowship was a quite special thing. But I also went to things like the meditation meetings, because that's another kind of thing that we do, meditating together.
So at the end, do you start to use the AA meeting as a way of meeting friends? Everywhere you travel, you go to meet AA meetings instead of a bar. Mm,
Yeah, you really can, and that was like a core part of my social group in Berlin. Yeah, you absolutely can. Like people do turn up and they're like, "Hey, I'm visiting from another city. I want some tips, like good places to eat, things to go and see in this city.
uh-huh.
Does anybody fancy joining me for stuff?" And sure, like it is a ready-made friendship group in some ways, or like I certainly found that with with the meetings I attended. I mostly met like the travelers who were quite often that I met were American. It's much bigger, I think, in the States. But they travel and they come, and a lot of them like, yeah, the first thing I do is find out where the recovery is in a city that I'm going to. I just want to be comfortable that I've got some people to speak to.
Wow, that's a cool travel tips. I think that's nice. Um, so I also want to ask you. You talk about you realize like drinking and the anger always come together, and what make you start to drink from the first place?
I mean, I just think I was born with it. I inherited it off my father, maybe. Um, but I,
So were you with like a vodka bottle when you came out?
apparently, my dad used to give me cider when I was a baby to keep me quiet. So I did, but I started drinking maybe when I was 12 or 13. And I know that even at that age, there was nothing normal about my drinking. I, if even for a 13-year-old.
You went like for 30 years old, they shouldn't be drinking at all.
Yeah, yeah, they shouldn't be drinking at all. But when alcohol is prevalent in your family, it's a thing. But yeah, I could look at it. And there was a lot of us that drank at school. We used to drink on Friday nights out on the playground or before school discos. And the normal thing was to get like 1 liter bottles of white cider. It's quite strong, 8.4%. But I was the one who usually bought two
Mm.
bottles because one might not last. And that's when I look back at it, that's like sure, everybody else bought one bottle and I bought two just because. So you can kind of see like right from day one, there was something that was not normal about it. And the anger, I think, I mean, one thing about the anger is like when and this was like a key problem for me because I just was often in a rage, as an adult, like raging about everything. It is not a nice state to be in. I've also had rage when I was sober, and I never realized how exhausting it is. Was another thing, just being angry is, it's such a trial. And yeah, I think just like anything and everything annoyed me. It was always somebody else's fault, and I kind of thought that that was why I drank. That I just like all these things that happened to me or things that people did were the reasons that I drank. And what I didn't realize is this is a common thread with addicts, and in the big book of AA, it talks about needing to be the director of the show, and if everybody just fulfilled their roles in life, then it would be fine. If they just did what I wanted them to do and expected them to do, then I wouldn't have any problems. But of course, that's not how life works, and it's not how people work. Um, and other people may suffer this and not be addicts, but it is pretty common for addicts and alcoholics that this is an expectation, that they're hard done by because, life doesn't treat them well and people don't treat them well and people don't do what they want to. But this anger that I had, and going to therapy when I was still drinking and just talking about all the people who'd made me angry and how much I drank because of it. Um, it was ridiculous. And at one point, my therapist asked me to keep a diary of how much I drank, and by Thursday, I got to 100 units in the week, and I was like, well, I'm not doing this because that's just a stupid number, and not, she was dropping hints. She gave me a book. She pointed to me about this book. It was called Potatoes, Not Prozac. It's a book about sugar addiction and mental health, actually, and about how a lot of people suffer mental health problems because of a sugar addiction and the impact sugar has in our lives. But actually, the person who wrote it realized that a lot of the people that suffered from this were actually alcoholics. Um, and her theory was, well, alcohol metabolizes into sugar in the body, and therefore you're left with this sort of sugar addiction. And she had like a couple of pages in the back. And my therapist was like, you should read the pages in the back. And I read all of the book about the sugar, and I was like, oh, this sugar addiction is really interesting. And and I missed the point that she was trying to drop the hint that maybe there was a cause of my problems that I wasn't looking at. So, that anger, I can't really remember it not being there. As a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
I would bottle a lot of things up. So my frustrations, I would just kind of push down, and then my dad would recognize that that's what would happen, and he would start an argument with me. That's how my dad dealt with knowing that I had anger issues. That he'd just start arguments, and then I'd scream the place down, and that was the problem solved. Apparently, just wind me up and wind me up until I exploded at him. Because he didn't know how to deal with either, but he knew that something had to give. Um, yeah, so anger was a big thing, but I think the thing that getting sober gave me about understanding this anger was a lot of it was fear. Actually, I didn't realize that fear
Mm-hmm.
was the emotion that happened before the anger. It was so fleeting that I didn't, that there were things that were threats to me, things, and I say threats to me like, you don't do
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm expecting you to do, and therefore I look stupid. At work, if somebody doesn't do their job, do I look stupid? And if I look stupid, then I'm not happy. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that, I was just going through fear. And one of the things that you have to do in this, like looking at yourself, is like it's called a fear inventory. All of the things you're afraid of, and you just realize, wow, there was a lot that I was afraid of, and a lot of things that would provoke me and make me fearful. And therefore, my next reaction was to be angry about it and to lash out at things. Um,
How did you realize that it was fear?
I think that's because that was part of the process, actually, like the process of doing the work in AA includes this. What did other people do to me? What was my part in it? Now, what was I afraid of happening in each of these scenarios? Because part of at the core of the process is this belief that um, we need to control things, and if we need to control things, then we must fear of things going wrong, um, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore um, you had to try to work out like what was it that was causing these reactions. And it also was quite, and also you had to scratch beyond the surface fear as well. Um, and a lot for me, you try to boil it down to like core fears, and some of them are not so unusual. Like one core fear is of being alone, and when you realize actually you're in a world where, certainly in my case, I had a husband, I had friends, I had family, I had all these people around me. This fear of being alone was kind of ridiculous, but the thought that people would leave me, and that was one core fear. Um, there was another core fear of being poor, actually, particularly being old and poor. These two things go together. And therefore, a lot of stuff at work is like, well, I can't lose my job because if I lose my job, I lose my ability to control my source of income and ultimately my ability to have money when I'm older and not be old and poor. Um, but you kind of realize that, there's some very deep seated things, which a lot of humans probably have, but
Mm-hmm.
just a lot of humans maybe can understand rationally. Okay, maybe this thing bothers me sometimes, but it shouldn't control me,
Yeah.
and it's maybe irrational. The fear of being alone when you're surrounded by people is quite an irrational fear.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I read some interesting research actually about um, brain development when you're a child, particularly about the impact of having your parents. Your mother should be with you in theory, from 0 to 18 months, and your father's important from 12 to 24 months. And if the parent is absent, your brain doesn't develop correctly. And one of the things about this lack of brain development is the fear response is much higher.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and your rational brain can't temper the irrational brain, like the
Mm-hmm.
animal brain. So you get caught in these cycles of fear that the old animal brain goes like danger, alert,
Mm-hmm.
fear, warning, and it's a very powerful thing because the front of the brain doesn't have the power to calm it back down and go, actually, this is very irrational fear. Um, and yeah, I mean, the theory that I read about that, it makes sense. Like, yeah, okay, my animal brain is very loud. And when I meditate, which I don't do at the moment, but I do know when I meditate, the animal brain is a lot calmer. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and there are ways to kind of deal with these fears through meditation and trying to make your rational thoughts stronger.
Cool. That brings my next question. Now you don't have alcohol to cope with your issue. So when life happens, how do you deal with the stuff?
Food, food mostly. Um, uh, and I also can't get away from this thing that my doctor once said to me. He was a really good doctor, actually. This GP who never pushed me and always just kind of said, maybe if you drank a bit less and exercised a bit more,
Mm.
things would be fine. And he also told me that food is the most commonly used and ineffective antidepressant, and exercise is the most underused but effective antidepressant. Um, so food and sugar it's still a thing in my life. Definitely, it's still how if I have extreme reactions, I tend to binge on food, which I know isn't healthy, but at the same time, I go, well, I can't say it's not going to kill me because maybe I'll end up diabetic. Um, but it's not going to have the same immediate impact and consequences that alcohol would have in my life. But also, I try to exercise, and I do. I come out of either doing weight training or boxing or something, and my mood is better. I know it sets me up for the day well if I go and do some exercise. And now that I'm going, I do something 5 or 6 days a week.
Wow.
Um, it's really helpful, and I do it at the beginning of the day. I don't have the energy to do it at the end of the day, but I also think doing that at the beginning of the day means like my mental health starts off on a good footing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so um, exercise plays a big role in trying to improve my mental health. I still take antidepressants, a very low dose. Um, I've tried to come off them a couple of times. Hasn't generally gone well most times. The last time, yeah, the last time my best friend ended up saying maybe you shouldn't come off your antidepressants when you hate your job. Um, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Oh, and there was something else. There were three things at the time that he was just like, oh, and I was moving. Oh, and it was the middle of winter as well. No, it was the middle of winter, and I also, I think I have seasonal affective disorder. My depression is worse in winter, and he was just like, don't try to come off your medication when all these factors are playing a part. Um,
I remember I gave you a book talking about the antidepressant at the beginning. Then a few weeks later, you told me you had a breakdown because you were trying to reduce the medication.
yeah, and it's strange. I think this idea of this the lost connections book. I totally get, and I think that's also one of the things that AA provides. You do need people. If you have mental health problems, you really do need people to sort through it. Not least of which because normal people do not understand your mental health issues. And talking to normal people about your mental health issues or alcoholism or addiction or look, my mum had breast cancer. She could not talk to normal people about going through breast cancer and the impact that had on her. And I think if you have serious problems in your life or serious things happen to you, the best thing that you can do is speak to other people who understand that problem. Um, and that, like I said, I haven't been to an AA meeting for quite a long time, but I still have alcoholics in my life. I think it's important to have alcoholics that I speak to because um, A, they understand me. B, they will call me on my bullshit. Actually, this is another thing I think about not being self-indulgent. Um, and uh, I don't want to sound callous when I say, if you have mental health problems, I don't think you can be indulgent in them. I don't think you can just blame everything on having the problem and not doing anything
Mm-hmm.
about it. I think, as we've talked about, if you start doing something about it, if you start trying to gain some control and some agency, sure, you're not necessarily cured, but things
Yeah.
will be better. And the lows won't last as long. And you might also be able to recognize this is a low, but I will come out of the low at some
Mm.
point. It's not going to last forever. Um, a big thing, how do I deal with it? How do I deal with being an alcoholic? How do I deal with having depression? I talk about these things. I accept that I have these things. Um, I try to take the actions that prevent it getting worse. And now, if I hit a bout of depression, I sleep. I take some rest. And I think they're saying about like where this played a part in work,
Mm.
that before I worked in Berlin, and I would say Germans are a lot better about health issues. They're a lot more accepting that if you are unwell, you should be at home
Yeah.
resting. Whereas Londoners are, if you are unwell, you should take every medication you could find and you should be in the office. Like unless you're literally dying, you should be in the office. And this isn't healthy. So I think Germany did teach me this, which is you have to look after yourself, you have to accept that sometimes you need a
Mm.
break.
You said you still talk to alcoholics. Are they recovering alcoholics, or they are still drinking heavily?
I have a mixture in my life. Let's say I still have one of my best friends who's sober through AA. I have friends who moderate their drinking, knowing that it's a problem. I speak to people about people in their lives who are very much active alcoholics and what to try to do about that, um, and how to try to support them. Um, at the moment, I don't have any. Do I have any full blown alcoholics in my life? No, not that are part of my everyday life, I would say. Um, Occasionally they crop up, and I can do what I can to help them. But principally, look, what I can do is say, sure, I hear what your problem is. I can tell you how I solve that
Mm-hmm.
problem. The rest is up to you. Like it's your decision. Um, I I think most often just through the number of people I bump into at work. Work is where I come across the most active alcoholics and addicts.
Really? Work?
Yeah, but mostly because I recognize the behaviors, and so there have been a bit the same as like when I recognize somebody has a mental health issue, I will talk about mental health issues. When I recognize somebody possibly has a problem with alcohol, I will talk about having a problem with alcohol.
Mm.
Um, but like one of the key things I think is like if people aren't ready to deal with their problems, then they're not ready to deal with their problems. You can't
Mm-hmm.
tell them to deal with their problems. You can tell people how you dealt with your problems and leave them to think about it. And I have done that quite a
Mm-hmm.
few times at work. I've actually had to go to hospital with a colleague with somebody who overdosed at work.
Wow.
Um,
At work?
yeah, um, and it was a big issue when it happened, and my manager was like, "What the hell do I do?" And I was like, "You can deal with the rest of the company, and I will go to hospital with this person because you, as their manager, can't help them. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing you're going to say that's going to be helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
me, as somebody who has a history,
Mm-hmm.
can hopefully be there for them and say, look,
Mm.
there's a solution to your problems if you want it."
Mm.
Um, on that occasion, they had another 18 months of
Mm.
making a mess of themselves. They did get clean actually in the end, and I have seen them since. Um, but yeah, I think you interact with a lot of people at work, so of
Mm.
course, statistically
Mm.
speaking, this is where you will come across the people more often.
Yeah, I so you talk about you cannot ask someone to get help if they are not ready to get help. Um, but I understand that. That's totally right. But how do you deal with your mental health, your emotions when this keeps happening? For example, if someone who obviously has a problem and constantly ask you for help and for support, but they are not doing any work, actual work inside in it, and you keep helping. Do you cut it off at some point? How do you deal with this type of relationship to keep yourself sane?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely had to do it in recovery. There are people that I had to stop responding to. Like, it's pretty normal for like everybody exchanges telephone numbers and says, if you need somebody to speak to, I'm here. It's pretty normal. I had one person who uh, was also quite inappropriate with me as well, in terms of like sexually inappropriate with some of the things that they said, but they were also just, not doing anything about the fact that they just kept relapsing and come back in. And all I could do was say, look, my recommendation is you go and do something about this. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not. I just had to say, look, I'm not. I don't want to engage in this conversation further because it's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's not helping either of us. Like, you know what you've got to do about this. So I've had that happen with people in recovery. Um, I have got a friend who jokes about, "Are you going to get the leaflets out?" Because they've got ups and downs, and they recognise there's an issue. Um, they recognise some things are not controllable, but they're not ready to completely stop. And in that case, it's a friend. It's they've done therapy as well. They have done things, and we kind of laugh and joke about it a little bit, actually. And I was like, sure, we can talk about this. We can do something about it if you want to do something about it. Um, but I would still maintain the same line. Look, sure, we can talk about it, but we could also talk about doing something about it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I, um, yeah, I mean, I haven't come up against it too often. I mean, the unfortunate thing is, certainly in AA, if people disappear, they disappear. And um, if people really want to do something about it, um, they will stick around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I think that's part of how things work. Actually, like, if you want to turn up to AA meetings and bitch and moan, I mean, you can do that too, and everyone will be like, keep coming back. And some people take a long time to adjust, but people would genuinely say, look, just keep coming. Eventually, if you just keep coming, like, you will kind of get there. Like, if you invest the time. But if you don't invest the time, there's one thing that will probably happen,
Mm-hmm.
and that's that, you will start drinking again, and you won't. It's very naff in some ways that people talk about the miracle of recovery.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about how blessed they are to be an alcoholic. And what you realize is, and again, with the links with mental health, we we get to go through this toolkit of like how to live life on life's terms.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people that are suffering, and they don't necessarily have addiction, but they suffer with mental health, and they're struggling to get to grips with, like, how do I deal with this? And the fact that Russell Brand, have I got the name right? He did his book. I think, is it called Unfucked or something like that? And it's clear he's done this like 12-step thing, and he's done it for the person who just wants to deal with the problems in their life. But it's pretty much like it is still the 12 steps of AA,
Mm-hmm.
like how to go through this stuff, whatever your problem is, and try to deal with it. And I've recommended that to some people. Like, sure, like you got problems. There's this book by Russell Brand. Go and have a go at it, like, and see what you think of it. Um, there's all sorts, and there's all sorts of books on all sorts
Mm,
of ways to try to improve your mental health. But at the end of the day, they all involve doing work. They
mhm.
all involve doing hard work, I think. And if you do the work, it pays off. And if you don't do the work, then it doesn't.
Since when were you sober?
Um, February the 4th, what year are we in? 2020. We're in 2021. February the 4th, 2011.
2000,
There we
wow,
are.
10 years.
No, hang on. 2011? Oh, I can't do the maths. I've been sober for nearly 10 years. I can't do the math. Oh, it's 2022 then. 2020, February the 4th, 2022. Nearly 10 years. Yeah.
Oh, so since then, you haven't drink alcohol even once.
Not even once.
And what happened on February 4th, 2012?
Um, Actually, so that was my first day sober. It was the day after I'd been to the doctors.
Mm-hmm,
It was the day my friend told me how much I'd scared the hell out of him.
mm-hmm.
I actually had a skiing holiday booked. So, um, what happened immediately after? I went skiing. Um, I had to convince myself not to throw myself off a mountain one day. That was good. Um, um, so what happened? Yeah, I mean, I stopped and I stay stopped.
And
It sounds a bit
not even once.
not even once. Like I said, I had a bumpy road
Okay.
in. I had a few times trying to dry out, but um, once I committed to doing the work and staying sober, I haven't no haven't looked back. I can't say I haven't thought about it. I was very close to relapse over a boy when I was, I think, 3 days off a year sober,
Mm-hmm.
and I messaged a few people actually saying, "Can you talk?" And the person who responded was actually my first sponsor, the one who didn't work out, and he's like, "You are not going to relapse over a boy." He's like, "How embarrassing is that going to be? I think 3 days off a year." He's like, "Do you really want to turn up tomorrow going, I was nearly a year sober and I relapsed over a boy?"
What's
It's
boy?
like, you can, a boy, a guy, the
Oh,
guy I was dating at the
okay.
time. Um, he's like, I think he's like, "Are you going to be a Britney? Are you going to be a boo hoo? This boy
Mm,
upset me." And, it was pretty brutal in some ways
mm-hmm,
to just be like, "Come on." And he's like, "What you need to do is go home and get some ice cream and put something funny on telly and get yourself to bed. And then when you wake up in the morning, come and see me." And that is what I did. I actually went to the supermarket, and when I stood at the till, I was just faced with all the alcohol that was at the till, and I didn't, and I didn't. I was really like, "Oh, there's a lot of alcohol in front of me." But I went home, I ate the ice cream, I woke up in the morning and went, "God, what was all that about?" And I think, like I said, there was a bit of, like, I don't know, be cruel to be kind in it. I think he did have to really kind of go, "Look, I mean, you could absolutely go and drink if you want to, but, like, do you really want to? Do you really want to throw everything away? The work that you've done, the improvements that you've made. Like, think about how you are, and all you have to do is get to bed."
mm-hmm.
You know, um, so that was the closest I came. 3 days off a year. And I can't say, there are sometimes, sure, sometimes, like, sometimes I'll go, "Oh, yeah, a drink might solve that." And, like, no, it wouldn't. Like, there's nothing that would be solved in my life by that. And I do have to remember how miserable I was and how angry I was and how, and most importantly, how it would kill me,
Mhm.
to be blunt. Like I know that is the end consequence of it because I've seen it happen. That's what happened to my dad,
Mhm.
um, and I don't want that.
Wow. And when you mean sober for 10 years, you not only no alcohol, did you take anything else? Oh.
So the things I only allowable stuff. So as in
Mhm.
medication, so antidepressants. It's a bit of a um, it's a bit of an odd one. Some people have a personal opinion that it's a mind altering
Mhm.
substance because what they talk about in sobriety and recovery is no mind altering substances of any kind. However, the what they call the Big Book of AA, it's really clear. Like we are not doctors. We do what our doctor tells us, and if our doctor tells us we need a medication for our health, then we take that medication. If if you were somebody who had a problem with painkillers or opiates, maybe, then you should maybe be very careful about taking codeine, morphine, Valium, benzos, like all these things. But I've known somebody in recovery who they screwed their back up really badly, and they were prescribed Valium, and that's one of the things that they used to do when they were active in their addiction. They used to take Valium, and they were really nervous about it. And people said, "You've got to have it. That's what your doctors told you to have. So you take what you're prescribed, and you keep doing everything else to to stay sober." So I have antidepressants. I've stayed on them. Caffeine is an allowed one.
Mhm.
We might argue, sure. I mean, it is mind altering. You get buzz. You get a buzz off caffeine, and sugar is mind altering. It does change your mood. These and nicotine, I think, are probably allowed things, but I don't smoke and have never smoked. So, um, yeah, I mean, those are the things that I've had. Um,
Mhm.
Nothing else.
And now, are you okay with sitting on the same table when other people drink?
Yeah, it's not a problem at all. Again, there's the line. There's a line about everything in recovery, but these like it's like the naked
Mm.
flame. Like we know we can't touch a naked flame. It's not safe for us. It doesn't mean other people can't be around the naked flame or whatever the analogy is. So no, it doesn't bother me. Drunk people
Mm.
do bother me. Um, for two reasons. One is they are exceedingly boring. The other is that they are. I fear that they may be
Mhm.
unpredictable. And this is something about how my dad was. His alcoholism was very unpredictable. And I think, there's just some fear that my response is anything
Mm.
could happen here. I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't want to be around when
Mhm.
it does. Um, so uh, part of me has thought about trying to do some trauma
Mhm.
therapy about the stuff that happened in childhood and how I still react to it. Um, But also, it's not unreasonable to say, do you know what? You're drunk, and I don't want to be around this. I have the choice to leave this
Mhm.
situation, and I will. But people just going out with friends. I've told them if you get really drunk, I'll go home. But probably I will be tired before you
Mhm.
get really drunk, and I'll go home anyway. Um, Same with my partner. He tends to not get drunk anyway. In fact, I think I've only seen him really drunk once, and he was hilarious. He was very sweet.
Oh.
Um, he was very cute. He did get a bit annoying and repetitive, but on the whole, he knows like if he's drunk a lot, he goes and sleeps in another bed. He doesn't. He doesn't bring it around me.
Wow. So what I was going to ask. So when you deal with your alcohol issue, do you still feel it's like everyday battle, or it's just now on autopilot?
I'd say it's not an everyday issue. Um, Autopilot's a bit of an odd word. Like, I have to recognize that I am
Mm-hmm.
an alcoholic. I have to recognize that I cannot drink. Um, I have to think about that. I mean, like, so alcohol in food is, um, it's a bit of an odd one. Like, I have realized now, like, I wouldn't have done it in my early days because I just didn't want to be faced with the smell or the taste of alcohol, or more importantly, to spend 48 hours obsessing about the fact that I've had alcohol. So that's, that was something about mental health. It's like if I had accidentally consumed a tiny amount in food, I just obsess about it, and that's not healthy. So um, I'm not quite like that now. I think I've had bites of things, and you go, "Oh, I've just eaten mince pies." Actually, we're getting to Christmas, so I've just eaten something. Look, that's clearly had alcohol in it, so I just don't eat anymore. So I'm kind of watchful in that respect. Um, I drink like
Mm-hmm.
alcohol-free beers. Um, I would ideally have the like the absolutely 0% stuff, but sometimes I've also had the less than 0.5%. I have one of them, um, but I know, okay, I will have one of them. I shouldn't. I don't want to have more because like there's still some trace amounts of alcohol in it. Um, so okay, that bit's on autopilot. I think the other side of it is um, I still have to look after my mental health. I think the the mental health problems and the
Yeah.
alcoholism go together. Um, they talk so in AA there's talk about alcoholism as a physical, mental, and
Mm-hmm.
spiritual illness, and the spiritual bit is the
Mm-hmm.
hole in the soul. I think is an easy way to call it. We try to fill this void in our lives. The physical bit is it can be addictive for sure, um, and the mental bit is all the stuff
Mm-hmm.
that goes on in our head. And um, I this is another way that I recognize these people in the world, that there is stuff that goes on in an alcoholic or addict's head that does not go on in normal people's heads. I didn't realize that before. It's only when I heard other people talking about it, I was like, oh, you think these crazy things too. It's not just me. And I don't mean crazy in a bad way. I just mean like this stuff that I always was like, what is this stuff that's going on in my head? Like this constant inner dialogue. I mean, some would say like a schizophrenic dialogue, or the devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was exhausting, this constant arguing with myself. And now, these days, it can be there a little bit, but like if my mental health is in good shape, it's not there as much. Sometimes occasionally I get into this argument with myself, which probably tells me, oh, you need to do something
Mm-hmm.
to take care of yourself, because this arguing only happens when you're not in a fit state. That might also be practicing arguments with other people as well, actually. If I start practicing arguments with other people in my head, there is something not good in my own mental health. It's odd, but finding people like, do you practice arguments in your head that you're going to have with other
Yeah.
people because you have to win them, of course. No, no, crazy people do this, like myself. And again, I don't mean crazy like in a pejorative way, but it's a signal like there's something unbalanced about our mental health. If that is the line of thought that we're engaging with, and I think when your mental health is good, those lines of thought just don't tend to happen as often.
I don't think it's for crazy people. I think everyone has it. And for example, when this kind of dialogue happen, for me now as a comedian, I just write it down. It's material. I
Yeah.
think to have a to have a creative outlet is very important, because then you see yourself not as crazy, but as being creative.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. I mean, I'm sure, like, when other people hear it out loud, it is kind of funny, and I think I mean, it's both funny because you hear the stuff that's on in somebody's head is sometimes ludicrous, but you're right. It's also funny because the same thing goes on in other people's heads. And I think that was another thing, that one of the powerful things um, in recovery, you tell these stories and people laugh. And at the beginning, it's a little bit unnerving, like, you're laughing at this stuff that's going on inside me. And they're like, no, 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 we're laughing because that stuff's going on in our heads as well. And like, it's just how we are. And it is kind of it's funny because it's funny. It's just like there's nothing rational about it. There's stuff that's going on in our heads, and like if you laugh at it, like great, okay, like it takes the power out of it a bit. Like it shouldn't be so serious. Um, and look, Uh, I think one thing, like, it's not to go too dark about things, but like there are days when that voice is, I don't want to deal with this. Like it's probably just easier to kill yourself. And it seems like a really rational thought, and like a little bit head's going, well, really, yeah, yeah, that's definitely the solution. It must be the solution. And again, you say that out loud around other alcoholics, and yeah, we get that voice too sometimes.
This sounds super normal. There are lots of comedians talking about voice like this. For example, they talk about the voice ask them to go jump from the window, and the other voice says, "How about let's eat the ice cream and watch the last episode of a Squid Game and leave the suicide to tomorrow."
Yeah, and it's exactly, and leave it till tomorrow. That is like put it off because probably tomorrow you won't feel like that, and probably in 15 minutes time you won't feel that. And they do. I mean, I think with teens there's this talk about it's like a very impulsive thing quite often for teenagers to recognize actually like 1 minute that is what my brain is saying to me, and the next minute that is not what my brain is saying to me. But it's um again, I think engaging with other people, like, okay, you have that voice as well. Right, okay. And they said, look, you just have to ignore that voice for today.
Mm-hmm.
Go and speak to people, go and do something, go and distract yourself. Like, probably don't sit at home alone with it. Like, that's probably not the best thing to do. But recognize that it's just one voice. And I think going back to this, like again, like people find the God thing in AA like a bit weird, but some people talk. I heard about this, like the voice of God is the voice of good, and you have these two voices inside of yourself. You have the voice of good, and you have the voice of bad. I think actually, and if you spend time nurturing your mental health, the voice of good is the one that is loud. The voice of good is the one that you hear to yourself most often. Um, and it's the one that wants good things for you. And if you want to see God as a loving and kind entity who just wants the best for you, um, this thing that you hear um,
Mm-hmm.
is good, is God. And like if you don't look after yourself and your mental health, then sure, the bad one is the loud one. The bad
Mm-hmm.
one is the one that when I properly, like, I feel like I relapsed, like the time that I was determined to stay sober and stuff happened, and I just went out and drank
Mm-hmm.
because that voice was going, you should just go and get fucked up drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is the solution right now. And the other voice was not there going, this is a bad idea. You don't want to do this. Um, like that was the last one before I got into AA. But like I can look back and just go, absolutely. The voice that I was listening to then was the bad voice. It was not the one that wanted the best for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one that I have to work to make sure um, doesn't get to maintain its presence in my head all the time.
Wow, cool. Thank you for being so open to talk about your issues with alcohol. I have like one question to close this session. Um, as you said, like you cannot offer people help before they are ready to help themselves. Um, and it took you a long time to really realize you are alcoholic. So for those people who not yet uh, realize they are alcoholics, uh, do you have anything to say to them? and or for people who have those type of friends around them, what's the best thing they can do?
I think if you yourself think you maybe have problems, the question to ask yourself is my alcohol or drug consumption costing me more than money? This is a very, I think, important question. Like when it's costing you relationships, your job, and so on, that's the point that you maybe want to think about, like, I need to do something about it. For the people who have these people in their lives, I mean, what happened to me was my husband, then husband, going, is it time to do something about it yet? And the times I said no, he did not push it because that is what he was told to do. You know, his friend said, look, at Ben's worst points, ask him if he wants help. Because at the worst point is the point where you might change your mind. Um, you know, and if he says no, don't press it. And I think if you can do that same thing with the people in your life, look, for the 12-step programs, or even not. There's a lot of other ways to find recovery from from drink and drugs around. I think you can find these on the internet, and if that person turns around and says, "Yes, I want help," that's the point that you can go. I've done a bit of research. Why don't you try out this thing? Um, and maybe they say yes. And if it doesn't work out that time, don't berate them about it. Like a lot of people, I know a lot of people bounced, and they were in and out, you know, and they did, but they did get there. A lot of people do get there, but they don't get there because of people pressuring them to do it. They get there because they want to do it for themselves. So the same thing is that if your friend or family member is kind of bouncing around, also don't enable them. I think, you know, you can just be like, hey, look, you know, there's that thing that you can do, and that's what I can offer you, like to support you in doing that thing. But I also don't want to become involved in your drama. I mean, seriously, alcoholics, there is a lot of drama. Nobody wants to be involved in that drama, I think, unless they really, really care about somebody. Um,
Cool. Thank you so much. I realize that now I know what I wanted to talk with you. You said you want to uh, consider to join some trauma therapy to deal with the trauma you had of your dad being alcoholic. Um, do you are you aware of this type of support groups called adult children of alcoholic parents?
yeah, yeah, it's on the like. At some point, maybe I deal with this. I've got some friends
Mm-hmm.
who did ACA, and they
Yeah,
said it was amazing. Actually,
yeah.
they really found a lot of peace and benefit through that. You know, because this stuff lasts. You know, it sticks with us. It really does. Um, yeah, I mean, but I still go there going, am I ready to deal with this trauma yet? Yeah. It comes back to that hard work. And I know I said, like, you've got to invest the hard work. And there's some bit in me goes, I am not sure yet. I am ready to touch that thing.
Maybe you get your housing situation done and the renovation, everything done. Maybe at one point you have the capacity.
Yeah,
Cool. Please keep me posted if you start that part of journey.
cool. We'll do.
Cool, cool, cool. Thank you so much for doing this, and I hope you have a nice day there. Uh, yeah, talk with you soon. Bye
Awesome.
bye.
Thanks, Moni.